So welcome everybody. My name is Michael Kennedy. How many of you guys saw this similar talk to this last year? Nobody? Okay, excellent. I'm saying there's still lots of new stuff in here from last time. You know, MVC is one of those things that's changing very fast. Right? We've got 5 separate versions of ASP.NET MVC in just a matter of a couple of years. And if you actually track it on NuGet, you'll see that they release point versions like every couple of weeks or every month or something like that, like very rapidly, even faster than Visual Studio updates. Okay? And with each one of those changes, they've made some changes to what you get when you get a brand new ASP.NET MVC project. Sometimes it's minor, sometimes it's major. So what we're going to learn in this talk is we're going to sort of just start from there. We're just going to create a new project and look at what you get. So the ASP.NET team has done a good job of, giving us a starting place for our code. Like if you look at where things started from, it was web forms way back in 2002. You guys doing that? How many of you guys have done web forms? Okay. And how about MVC? Did everyone do an MVC? Pretty much. Okay, so way back in 2002, Microsoft sat down and thought deeply about what should you start from? What should be the starting project? What files should be there? What conventions should be followed, and so on. And that's been evolving for, I guess, 12 years now. Right? It's gone through a bunch of versions of web forms, from web forms to MVC, from MVC 1 to MVC 5 to 5.1. There's been a lot of thought and work put into what you get when you get a new project. In terms of the way that Scott Guthrie states it is, so you fall into the pit of success. So things are set up correctly for you so that the easiest path forward is the right path forward. So it might seem like this is a solved problem, like we've already got a solution to this because we've been working on it for 12 years. In fact, the answer is no, it's not a solved problem. There are many things that you can do when you create a new project that are actually really simple. Almost every one of these things I'm going to show you is like a fairly simple step that you can take to make your life, as you work on this project over time and so on, better. Okay? So, what do I mean when I say let's talk about brand new MVC projects? Do I mean stuff that you're doing within the first month? Stuff that you're doing within the first 6 months? No, I mean like file new project. Now what do you do? Okay. So that's where we're going to start from. We're just going to say file new project and we're going to start working. Okay, so we're going to focus on ASP.NET MVC 5 because when you say file new project, you would be kind of crazy to choose an old version of MVC as your starting point, right? However, a lot of what I'm going to show you applies to the projects you guys already have. Every one of you at some point said file new project or got one of those from somebody else. And it's got these implicit deficiencies that came with it when it did that. So you can apply what I'm going to show here to your other projects you've already created for the most part. A lot of the things I'm going to show you are relatively easy to retrofit onto older projects. Okay. But I'm just going to review super quickly some of the things of the older MVCs that have been solved as MVC 4 and 5 now. We're not going to go past 3. So if you look at maybe how could I have improved an ASP.NET MVC 3 project? Well, you may or may not remember, but there was this old MVC validation thing that was in there. It was kind of hokey. It was from the early days of MVC. Well, they actually took that out and replaced it with jQuery unobtrusive validation, right? But of course, they left those things in there, so that was a problem. When you create a new project, almost immediately from the second you say new, most of your libraries are out of date. MVC, more than any other system, depends on NuGet. You get something like 20 NuGet or 15 NuGet packages when you say file new project. Every one of those is out of date, right? So you're kind of starting from old code, not new code. So maybe you want to update those. We'll talk about some of these other things. One of the recommendations is minifying and bundling your CSS. We'll talk more about that, but like as much as you can compact your CSS and make fewer web requests back to your server, typically the faster the appearance goes. So that's one of the things you should do. Do some stuff for JavaScript. Let's see, other unused things. We'll talk about reset files. view models. Let's see, put your scripts at the bottom of your layout page. All these different things are things you could have done for MVC 3 to make it better. And if you have a project which was started from file new MVC project and somebody chose 3, all of these things should probably be applied. But if you did 4, if you started at 4, well, 4 fixes many of these. So all the green stuff was something the MVC team fixed with the project template when they released MVC 4. Okay, so they said, yeah, this thing is junk, let's get it out of here, nobody uses it. They said, oh, look, we'll actually add this bundling feature to MVC and so on. So some of these things are solved, but only if you start with the newer MVC. Right? And now we're at MVC 5, which is awesome. They've got some great stuff. Actually, sorry, let's review just how that shows up in MVC 4. So if you look at MVC 4, one of the recommendations was minify and bundle your CSS. So you'll see they actually added a bundling and minification. Yes?
Just unmute your microphone.
Is it muted?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So
Got it.
um,
These slides are absolutely available. Now I don't have to speak so loudly. Thank you. Yes, they will be available. They should be on your USB already. Yeah. So they added this bundling here, and if you just say file new project in MVC4, you get like, here's the JavaScript, here's a CSS bundle, here's some more JavaScript bundles, and so on. So they've sort of done some of these things for us. You need to know how to use them. But if you've started with an older project, you should sort of mirror this back into your code. We'll talk more about that. Okay. When we got to MVC5, there were not as many changes to the project template, but one of them is sort of a very apparent change, something that will sort of strike you in the, make it very obvious when you run the project. And that's, they've added this thing called a reset CSS by way of including Bootstrap. How many of you guys know Bootstrap? Yeah, excellent. So if you haven't worked with Bootstrap or you sort of know it but you haven't applied it, then you absolutely should check it out. It's amazing. We'll do some stuff with it. One of the components of Bootstrap is this thing called a reset CSS. We'll talk more about that as we go through the lesson. But that is part of the MVC5 thing. So they fixed that. And so we're down to what, like 5 things on my list here? Back there's plenty more to go. Okay, so if you look at the MVC5 template, it's completely not obvious. But if you actually go and look at what that CSS bundle contains, it contains Bootstrap, right? Which means that it does a lot of the reset stuff to normalize look and feel across different browsers and so on. Okay. All right, so that's some of the stuff that you could have done or should have done before, but I'm going to give you a list of 18 other things that you can do as you get started on your new project, applying old, new, MVC5, all those versions. Okay? So, number 1. When you look at a new project in MVC5, I don't know if you guys have done this yet, you said file new project in MVC5, but they have a completely new dialog that lets you sort of pick different features. So if you listen to Scott Hanselman or Scott Guthrie, Tom Galloway, those guys, they talk about the one ASP.NET. And a lot of the idea of what they're talking about when they say that is, it used to be, you would be presented this dialog, you would have to say file new project, and it would say, well, do you want web forms? Do you want MVC? Do you want web API? Do you want WCI? Which one do you want? And if you make the wrong choice, it's super hard to get back to the other mechanism, right? So if you choose web forms and, oh, geez, I need MVC, well, you're going to do a lot of web config hacking and a lot of stuff to rebuild what the project would have done. So in MVC5, now when you say new project, you get to pick web forms and MVC. You can also choose the web API. So sort of, you pick the one up here that you're most likely to use, but then you can also check off the options down here. Right? Of course, you're also adding unit tests, right? Because your projects have unit tests. Yes, good. Okay, there's some stuff about authentication if you want social stuff, but just knowing that you get to choose sort of this pick and choose. So think of all the things you're going to want to use when you say file new project. That one's relatively obvious because you're forced to go through this title. All right, number 2. Create a base controller for all of your controllers. So let's just go and start with file new project while we're here. Like I said, that's where we're starting. So over here, I'm just going to create a new project. File new, and let's say this thing called Sidewaffle installed, which lets you create a whole bunch of different types of projects and add pre-built items like Angular JS controllers and stuff like that. So you see a bunch of stuff here. The only one you really would normally see would be ASP.NET Web Application. It's the only choice. Now, if you look really closely, so if you squint and zoom in like that, you can see that there's a Visual Studio 2012 section here. It's got all the choices that sort of forced you down one path or the other. Right? If you really want to go that way, but if you pick this, then you just get one. Okay. So let me close that thing because it kills my mouse. Okay. So let's just go over here. Let's suppose we're going to have a DevWeek blogger. Just suppose we're going to create like some kind of blog app, right? We need some sort of theme for all the different things that we're going to apply. So let's say we're going to do a blog post here. And then here's this dialog. Let's suppose we maybe want to do web API, so we'll check that, and we want to do MVC, but we're mostly going to do MVC, and we'll have some unit tests. Yeah. Okay. Now, you notice in the bottom left, if you zoom a lot, and wait for the zoom to catch up. There you go. You can see, you'll see a bunch of NuGet stuff happening in that purple area. Adding Bootstrap, adding jQuery, adding a bunch of stuff about MVC, downloading, waiting, and done. All right, ta-da, you have a new MVC application. Now what? Okay, now notice, this is just a little README that gets dropped in here, so we can actually get rid of this. But when I run my project, what we will see is a different looking template than the old one. One that looks pretty good. I wouldn't say it looks good, but it looks not bad. So that's because it's based on Bootstrap. All right. So we'll go and play with this, the Bootstrap component later. But here's our new project. All right. So my first real concrete recommendation to you is just make a base class for all your controllers. Right. So that's pretty straightforward. So over here we've got account controller, home controller. And let's just go in here and create a base class. So we'll say create a new controller. And we could either do this or we could just create a class. There's really not much to it. So we'll create an empty MVC controller. And I'm going to call this say base controller. Or we could say blogger controller or blogger base controller. How about that? So we'll add this. And then we need to retrofit our few classes here. Not that one. So this one where we have controller, of course we're going to want now blogger base controller. And over in our account controller, same thing. And just you got to remember every time you got a new controller to go and change the base class, right? It's easy to forget. So why would you do this? Well, you wouldn't do it because you would have a view. I mean, in fact, you might even go, this is an abstract base controller if you wish, right? But you might have common properties that you always want to get to. So you guys use things like Entity Framework, right? Or maybe MongoDB if it's really good. But some sort of like object context thing that lets you get at your database. So a very common thing to do would be something like this. So suppose I had a class, let me just make it here for a second. Class data context. Disposable, almost done, right? Disposable. Alright, let's just get rid of this. Alright, so here's maybe our data context. Let's just imagine that that's a real class, right? So we could have a protected data context, something like that. Right? So you don't have to create this in every single class. Just basically every controller that you create always has access to your database, or something like that. And if you do it that way, then of course, you can do things like this. Override dispose. Nope. Dispose. Right down here, you can say data context.dispose, right? Because you're supposed to for Entity Framework classes. So super easy. In a real project that gets big, you'd have a lot more stuff. Right? So there's a super simple thing to do. Not every one of my recommendations is simple, but that's one of them. Okay. So we can start with this and just say we're going to use this common base class, and we can put utility methods, things that are always shared, like data contexts and so on. All right, number 3. Your NuGet packages are already out of date. So I just really quickly spoke about that, but let's go look inside our project and see what we have in there. All right, so it seems like each version of MVC has more and more and more NuGet stuff. Like there's never taking away from the NuGet, there's only adding. All right, so let's just go over here and have a quick look at the stuff that's installed. So you go into your packages folder and zoom in. Notice the scroll bar, right? This whole page of stuff. This is not even all of it. Right? There's just a ton of things in here. Web grease, Respond, Modernizer, Newtonsoft, JSON.net, jQuery, Antler. Right? How many of these are up to date? How many of these have bugs that have already been fixed or improvements that you don't really have right now? So probably the first thing you want to do is go over here and say Manage NuGet Packages for the solution, and go to the updates. And so by default, it always goes to sort of whatever you did last. So we'll go to updates, and provided my internet's working, and it is. That's pretty awesome. My opinion is. You can come down here and see like jQuery is out of date. This turns out to be kind of a gotcha, so be careful. JSON.net is out of date. There's version 6. We have version 5. That's unfortunate. Entity Framework is out of date. We have version 5. There's version 6, which supports async and await, all sorts of good stuff. We should probably add that. MVC itself is out of date. Razor, web pages, MVC, so 5.1.1. We got 5.0.0, I think, whatever came with our project. All right, so we should update those. And you can do that through this little update all button. Luckily, they added that. That didn't used to be there. All right, so there's a better way to update them, as you'll see. You come down here and you can launch your package manager console. Right, package manager console, which probably would show up at the bottom for you guys. And you can do this. Can I zoom this? Let me zoom this nice and big for you. 200%. Right? So what you'll do is you'll say update dash package. Hit tab. Is it autocomplete? Yeah. Sometimes it's just slow. There you go. It does autocomplete. It's just super slow. Okay, now typically the way this works is you would say newtonsoft.json or something like that, and I think I should update it. Yeah, so you can see it's updated. But this is somewhat painful. What you would rather do is you would say just update package enter. And it updates everything, right? Normally it shows you like those licensing dialogues. There's no licensing dialogues, right? You're just like, yeah, whatever, just go. So this is going to run for a while. And we're going to stop watching it. But it's going to download a lot of stuff. You can see it really takes a good 3 or 4 minutes. So hopefully I don't need Visual Studio again for a moment. I'm not going to get it. All right, make sense? So even MVC itself is out of date. Now, depending on how old your project is, if you were doing like MVC 3 and you click that button, sometimes it kind of goes a little haywire. Like you'll do that update. By the way, make it back up first, okay? You'll do that update, and then you'll try to run it, and it'll say cannot find MVC, whatever with this strong name because it's like version 3 or 3.1 or something like that. So you may have to go through and sort of root around in your web configs if you choose to update MVC. Right? It would be nice if you could add a feature where you could right click and say, don't ever update this, please. Just take it out of my list of stuff that could be updated. But there's no way to indicate that. So if you go for the update all check, you're kind of, you're all in. All right, so here you go. Just do you guys have it for your records? You just type update dash package and just go. All right, and let that be loose. It's still grinding away over there, I'm sure. All right. Now, I said you need to be a little bit careful with jQuery, and that's because with jQuery 2, they made a pretty bold step to say, you know what, IE8, IE7, IE6, they're dead to us. Like literally, our stuff will no longer run on IE8. I can see why you would say IE7 and 6 are dead, right? Those things are horrible. I don't know if you guys have to store them, but they're bad news, right? But IE8 is kind of the highest you can get on XP, I believe. Which, I suppose if you're running XP now that it's kind of no longer supported, you kind of, get what you deserve. But if you're in like healthcare or something like that, there's a lot of old XP machines running around. So they might be running IE8. And if you did what I just did, my site will no longer run at all in IE8 or below. So what do you do? Well, there's some options. I'll show you. I hope that my Visual Studio has come back to life. If not, maybe there's a cancel option. Yes, it's done. Okay. So it said it couldn't be done until I restart Visual Studio, but you see I got Entity Framework 6, which that is the super nice one because that means that's the version of Entity Framework that supports async and await. I don't know if you guys know this, but you know, you can do link and then sort of threading all in one thing. All right. So because I have ReSharper installed, it takes a good while for Visual Studio to start, but eventually it will come back. Give it a moment. Excellent. That is back. Okay. So let's go to our DevWeek blogger. And we're not going to be doing anything else with this. So let's write some JavaScript. We all love JavaScript. All right, so we'll go to our home controller. Let's go to our index page. Now I'm going to write some bad JavaScript, you guys, just for a minute, and then produce something better after. Hold on. Thinking. I'm really supposed to do that. So it's supposed to let me jump. So let's just go over here and write some JavaScript. In fact, just so I can hold off on this for a minute, let me write this in the layout. Okay. So we have jQuery installed. You can see right here, render jQuery. We'll go back into these bundles again in a minute, but just hold off for a minute. So let's just do a little script here. How are the fonts? Would you like them a little bigger, or is it okay? Good. All right. So let's write a little stuff. This is like totally basic jQuery. So document, ready, function. I don't care what was in there. Close it off. Okay, so here we've got sort of the document ready event. And you know, here we can do awesome stuff like I love jQuery. All right, so if I run this in a respectable browser, I will mention, we get the page will load, and then you'll see a dialog box. Ding! Hi, I love jQuery. It was hard to see, but you guys can see at least there's a dialog, right? Okay. I can do all sorts of cool stuff over here, and I think since 2012, I can go up here and choose different browsers. So there's some really excellent stuff up here. If you have Opera installed, you have Opera. If you have Firefox installed, you have Firefox. You can choose IE, and I'm going to run IE 11 because I'm on Windows 8.1. So it comes up with a dialog box, which is cool. I kind of would like it to show the stuff behind the dialog box. I'm kind of over it, okay? Right? So every refresh, hello. Refresh, hello. All right, good. Now, are you all familiar with the F12 tools in the web browsers? No? So those things are great for web design, they're great for JavaScript debugging, and they're great for testing older Internet Explorer. So I can press F12 and go down here to these different sections. So I can look at like the network requests, sort of the UI responsiveness and profiling JavaScript. Here's straight up profiler. Here's some memory usage. Or I can configure the version of IE that I'm running. So let's minimize that. So right now I'm running Edge. But I can go in here and I can say, you know what, I want to pretend that you're IE9. And refresh. It says, hi, I love jQuery. When I made that change, it refreshed the page. So I can say, I want to be IE10. Ding. Or I can say, I love IE8. This is not a super awesome user experience for your web users that come to your site. Oh, hey, add event lister and like $. These things don't exist anymore, sorry. So NuGet is awesome that it lets you update all these things, but sometimes it will like bring you too far into the future potentially. How many guys have to support IE8? Yeah, that's a fair number, right? So what do? Do you like not update all your NuGet packages? So I've done different things. For a while, I tried to just be like super, but by the way, there's not just one, there's like a bunch of these. Eventually, I think there's 4 or 5, and then eventually they'll stop. Zoomy thing, window, mouse. Hey, it's back. So what do? Like, do you not update your NuGet? That would be kind of crazy. So I think the only real choice that I can see for you guys is just using a different jQuery. So if I go back to my slides, you look carefully, it says, oh, we basically forked jQuery at that point, and we're trying to maintain 2 versions sort of a crummy downgraded version and like a brand new shiny version 2. One of the big benefits of version 2 is it's much smaller, right? Which matters on the web for JavaScript. But if you have to support IE and you want to use jQuery, version 2 is out. So what do? You use version 1 dot something. Okay. So let's go to jQuery. Oh, not JQ, that's kind of the same. jQuery.com. And you can come over here and say download. You can see actually that right there, if you look closely. Download version 1.11 or version 2.1. So I think you're just going to have to download version 1.11 and just you sort of escape from using the NuGet version and just use that version. Because I don't, as far as I know, NuGet doesn't have a like let me install 1.0, 1x or whatever versus 2.0. Maybe it does. But a lot of things depend on 2.0. And so even if you install the other one, then it might install this one. It gets to be kind of a mess. So I would just go, I guess, over here, download, say download rest, sure. Save that somewhere, like a new desktop. Go to the desktop. Go back to Visual Studio. And go into your scripts folder and make, I don't know, folder or something. Legacy, or I'm not sure what you want to call it. But you can put that in there, and now you can include this. So instead of doing this here, you just include this guy. If that would have commented out on language, I hope. Instead of including that one, you can include this older one, which still works in Chrome, still works in IE11, as you'll see in just a moment. There you go, works in IE11. But if I go to that 12 tool and I say, no, I've got this crummy IE7 thing, it still works. Okay, so you guys have to choose. So I want shiny new jQuery, but I don't want to support the older browsers. I don't want to support the older browsers. Right? That's the one hang-up that I've seen. Like almost everything else works fine, but if you do this update dash package, you're opting out of sort of jQuery being able to support older browsers, just so you guys are super aware of that, because it's not obvious. I'm sure if you guys are web developers, you are using like the newest Chrome, the newest IE, the newer Firefox, and you will not notice this problem until you get a support call saying, the page just sits there when I click this button. And you're like, what do you mean it sits there? It's fine, I just tested it, right? But you know, like, wait a minute, what browser are you on again? Oh, I see what you're doing. Yeah, nice. So just be aware of being careful with jQuery. Makes sense? All right. What's next? Number 4. So we already saw from the layout template when we said file new project that they give us the structure. Okay. And this is really cool because one of the recommendations from the people who specialize in sort of web performance, not web performance like my server is at 67% capacity, but web performance in the sense of I click a link and then it's visible to me as a client, right? So how long until it's actually out in the browser as, you know, from a user, when would they say the page is finished? Not like what is the, you know, SQL query time or something like that. So there's this guy, afraid I'm forgetting his name, but worked on this YSlow initiative at Yahoo long ago, figuring out why are websites slow, what can we do to speed them up? And they've got a bunch of recommendations, some of which, if you follow them, do not apply to you. Like, you must use a content delivery network for your images. No, you should. Right? Maybe if you have a super busy site, but if it's like an intranet app, you don't need a content delivery network for that, right? But some of the things do make perfect sense, and one of them is to put all of your JavaScript at the bottom. Like, until 5 years, maybe even older than that, but until pretty recently, you would go to learn JavaScript, and they would say, you go to the head, and then up here goes your JavaScript, right? That's totally the wrong thing to do. Because the way that JavaScript works, and CSS and all these other things, is basically the browser goes and it hits one of these and says, oh, I have to download this. And then I'm going to process it, and then I'll go to the next step. Right? So if we put our CSS at the top, because it has to do with how things look, our content, and then our JavaScript, our page can become visible as soon as the content plus CSS is downloaded. And then in the background, it can continue asynchronously downloading the JavaScript. right? So that's one of the recommendations from the YSLO guys. Lots of people use it now. MVC has adopted this, right? Pretty cool. But you need to know how to use it. So there's two things that you have to be aware of. One, if you're going to include your JavaScript, it needs to go down here, probably below jQuery, I would bet, right? So it needs to go at the bottom. The other one is this render section called scripts. I'll show you how to use it. So suppose I'm over here, and let's say I didn't want to put this on every page. I only want this on the about page, right? We don't want to say hi everywhere with this annoying alert box. We'll just do it on the about page. Okay, so let's go over to the about section. About, and let's just put this here. I'm going to run this in the best browser that I know of. See if it works. Do you guys see the message box? You or haven't? Let's see. There's two ways to find out. There's the way where I already know the answer, so I can look at the source, or there's the F12 tools. So let's go F12, and you can see, if you guys look really closely, there you go, that there's an error over here. So I can click on that, and it will open up the console and set change color. Down here it says dollar is not defined. Oh, fantastic. That can't be good. Why is dollar not defined? Well, it's actually because, let's get rid of it. Yeah, exactly. I included it. You go and say view page source, zoom in. Up and up and up and up. Here's our script, and here's our footer, and then here's our jQuery. Obviously the wrong order, right? But you might be thinking to yourself, well, I put it, I put it at the very bottom of my CSS HTML. I can't go more down than that. Like that's the bottom. Like, how do I get there, right? So they, of course, knew that you may need to, on a page-by-page basis, inject an additional, better than what I did, a JavaScript file, potentially. Like, that's only relevant for that particular page. Maybe you are doing like an Angular JS files part of your site. You only need those files then. So you should just use that section. So you can say add section. You can spell section. It's a hard word right now. Script, and it also gives you intellisense. And then in here, you put whatever you want at the bottom. Right? Just do that. And then you're good. Okay. So that will inject it into here, which is, of course, below where it needs to be here. Make sense? So there's not really a recommendation in terms of like, you need to do this, but you need to be aware that sort of MVC has adopted this performance feature. And if you put your code in the wrong place, then it doesn't work. But if you put it in the right place, it should. Right down here. Oh, it's still waiting on this. Okay. Oh, it's only in the about. That's right. Sorry. Run it again. All right, so we go to the about. This comes up. See that little condensed menu? Remember when it was zoomed out, it was across here. Zoomed in, it goes into responsive mode, or bootstrap. So we go to about. Ding. I love jQuery. And the fact that it works. Make sense? Okay, so pretty straightforward because it's kind of been in the projects. But if you have an MVC 3 or older project, you should mirror what they're doing here in your new one. Even if you've upgraded it to 4 and then to 5, it still has this layout structure, right? So you need to fix it because it'll have the JavaScript at the top, which is, of course, the wrong place. Okay, so number 5. Make your own place for your script files. Now, it's a little hard to convince you this is super important in my little beginner project. But if you look at a real project, I'll open up a real project for you in a minute. You're going to have many JavaScript files, typically, right? These days, the web front end is becoming increasingly a JavaScript-rich environment, right? If you put your JavaScript files where the most likely place to put them would be in the scripts folder, then it's completely broken. Like if you've got something that starts with J and something that starts with R and something that starts with S, how do you jump to those files? Because this is only like a few NuGet packages, and you'll probably have more as you go. So finding your actual files in the sea of references really doesn't make any sense. So like you can't change that though, because NuGet puts them there. You don't get to tell NuGet where they go. So I would think of that folder as like add reference and just stay out of it. Right? Those are your external scripts. Make another folder and put yours in there. Okay? We'll do more of that as we get into some other stuff. better JavaScript later. But you know, as you try to find your scripts and sort of navigate around, you'll be super happy so that you can mix them in there. All right, number 6. MVC attribute copy. This is something that's really awesome, that's brand new, and even MVC 5 is off by default. Okay, so let's go see if we have MVC attribute routing, because that's the cool feature of MVC 5. Let's check it out. So you have this new section. If you're doing an older MVC, there's this place called app start. I think that came in 4. Anyway, they just kind of moved some files over there, so you kind of have a common place to look for startup code. So we've got our root config, excuse me, bundling, web API. Let's go look at this here. So here we have our what's called convention-based routing. So I come in here and I might do something like this. I may say, /home, /contact, boom, that right? It's controller/action. And if I really want to be cool, I can do like /contact100. And then, I can pass that data to my contact method. Maybe do something like that. But if I'm over here, and if I'm like on my home controller, let's add a new thing. And let's, working on blogger things. So let's make a post controller. Yeah, I just said class, but you know what? It's really not that hard. Blogger-based controller. So we want to have something like this. We have public action result or action result. What do you want to do? Let's say show int ID. Let's do that for now. Say return just content would have shown. So there's one way to get to this here, and I know that there's this convention, so I can always go to /post/show/100, and I must have forgot to compile or something. Oh, Lord, thank you very much. Convention things. Okay, so we would have shown 100. Now, typically, you want to have much more interesting URLs for sort of public-facing things. So if you're doing like stores or you've got products, you want to do something kind of non-standard for your URLs to make them SEO friendly. We'll actually go into that again in a little bit, but the more that you deviate from the standard, the harder it is to actually know, well, what the heck is the URL to this thing anyway? Like, you've got to go in here to this config, and typically this is like 500 lines or something for all these little special cases. It's like huge, right? So with attribute routing, you can do this cool thing. I can come over here and say, well, on this class, I'm going to have a root prefix. And let's just call this post. Down here, what do you want to have? You just make it up. So we're going to have some sort of root, and you have some kind of template. So if I don't put anything, it'll just be like /post. I'll put other things in there, like maybe I want to have show /curly ID /date, like all sorts of stuff. I could do that. So let's get adventurous. Let's suppose I want to do something like this. That new, all the stuff open. Okay, suppose I want to have something like /posts. Maybe it's a blog post. You want the year, then the month, then the date, then the title, dashes, whatever, something like that. You guys want to have that? So let's go and add this with attribute routing here. So we'll just take this little section here, and we'll put it there, that attribute. Boom, like that. And of course, this needs some kind of route data entry points where you name the variables here. So let's call this curly title. I'll show you some really awesome stuff too, right in here that maybe you haven't seen before. So this will be a year curly, month curly, day curly. Now, do you guys know how to do root constraints in the convention-based thing? So you can go over here and you write things that will make your eyes burn a little bit. You go down here and you say, okay, cool, constraints, cool, new. You can go do this. Say something like ID equals /d plus some, I some regex that means a number, right? I've given up on knowing regular expressions. I don't really need to. All right, so that you should put like regular expressions and other types of constraints there. In this new version, you just say this. You say, you know what, that's cool. That would be preferable if that's an integer, if that were an integer, and if that were an integer. Thank you very much. If not, the other one can be a string. Okay. So if I ask like /post/show or whatever, right, then it wouldn't choose the year part. I wouldn't try to understand that as a year, even if they did match. It would go, no, these are numbers. This version that you're asking over here is actually not numbers. Okay. So let's try to use this. I told you we could do this. This would be awesome. Let's go and run it. Try this up. Oops, put that up here. 404. Because attribute routing is not turned on by default, right? But just because it's not turned on doesn't mean it's hard to turn on. Roots dot map MVC attribute. Basically, we go through the controller, look for these attributes, and then register them as well. Yeah. Meanwhile, if I got this right, refresh. Oh yeah, I passed in an ID, there's no ID. So let me actually change my signature, but it's the reading one, right? So I should have these variables in here. I should have int here, int month, int day, and string title. And then let's just say title. Well, let me do 2 things. Plus 4, daytime, year, month, day. Makes sense? Just to prove that we're actually passing. 5. Sure says. Pretty awesome, right? So year, month, day, type. Okay, so this attribute routing is really nice. But even though it's a feature of MVC5, it's not turned on in MVC5. So sort of my recommendation on this point is, one, look into MVC attribute routing because the constraints and things are really easy and nice. It's debatable, but at least for non-standard routes, I think it's clearer if it's on the controller, because you're like, well, where is all, if I didn't have this here, if it was just like this, you're like, where does all this come from? How do I know data's being passed here? I have no idea. It's hidden somewhere else. Okay? So we use that. That's pretty awesome. Good? Questions? That is not PowerPoint. Okay. So that's a good one. It's easy to do. I definitely recommend it. Here's this example that I just did, right? You can have these constraints, put the route on there.
Show that. Why does it build a side route for double actions?
I'm not sure if it crashes. Let's find out. It's either going to crash or it's going to pick the first one. I think it will pick the first one. So the question is, what if I have 2 of these that are basically the same? I'll call this show 2, for example. Right? 5. Server. Ambiguous. Okay, error. Yeah. In the older style, the way that you were supposed to disambiguate things was you would use this name. Like this had to be unique. But that didn't actually apply to anything. It was kind of useless. You don't really name the new one, so I guess it's just a pattern that they're keying off of. Okay, good question. All right, number 7. Change your default route to be more user-friendly and SEO-friendly. How many of you guys are building public websites that you care at all about SEO? Yeah, so maybe a quarter of you guys, maybe. So, at Development, we have this place called Learning Line, where you can take online classes. And we changed our route so that not only would we reference stuff by ID, but we'd also reference it by name. In our case, we care about SEO. You guys know the first thing that Google uses to search, to sort of rank your site? The number 1 thing? Somebody said something. Actually, the first part of the URL, the domain, right? And then the second thing is the relevant path. And then everything else after that. So if you cared all about SEO, you should put something better than like tasks 140 on the top. That's completely junk. The other thing that you could care about for the rest of you guys, because you're like SEO, yeah, whatever, don't care about that. Let's go, actually let me just fix this. Get rid of this thing. So I have maybe, yeah, that's fine. We're done. And I come over here, I create a new window, and I say, I want to go to title. Notice how that already comes up in like my search. Right? If I had somehow not put that on the end, and it wasn't actually the title of the page itself, then it's sort of gone. So it gives you like a much cleaner way of sort of letting people bookmark it and jump around and so on as well. So you might care about that. But it's super easy, you guys will see. If you come over here to this, you just say, you know what? This thing has / curly name on the end. And, by the way, that name, just like the ID, is optional. So if I run it, you'll see my site still works. There's nothing magical happening. It didn't like, I have to go update my site. If I go to the contact still works. But if I want to go view my posts, I could say, let me just change this one. Not using the custom route, I could say, posts show 100 / the title or something like that. Actually, I think my HTTP routing kind of stopped it, didn't it? Let's see if I can do it for home/about of jQuery in my title. So it's super easy to just add a little bit more SEO command line interface of the URL friendliness to your site. Okay. So that's a pretty simple, short, easy one, right? So you just make this minor change, you add the name or something like that. Okay, what's next? Number 8 is Web Essentials. You guys know Web Essentials? How many use Web Essentials? Oh my gosh, you guys, if we're not holding your hand up, we're missing out. I'm going to show you some stuff that's super awesome. This actually might blow your mind a little bit. So, check this out. The best feature, I think, of Web Essentials is probably about browser link. But if you actually look at Web Essentials, this is a free add-on. It's not like Sharpen or something where it's awesome, but it slows down Visual Studio and it costs $200. This is like, it's awesome, it doesn't slow down Visual Studio and it's free, right? So, let me just look really quick. If I go to Web Essentials, webessentials.com, there's all these different features that it adds. Let me see if I can show you. You just download this stuff. I think it's like a BizX file or whatever. So there's all sorts of awesomeness in here. So suppose I want to make, is this in the right place? Yeah, right here. Suppose on this page, I wanted to have 3 entries in an unordered list with the class contact item. I could say, angle bracket UL, close angle bracket, LI, type of thing, change the class, close it, right, all that stuff. Or I could use this thing called Zen coding. Right, it's not awesome, right? Zen coding that comes from Web Essentials. It's not created by Web Essentials, but it's implemented by Web Essentials. So I can say I want a UL that has in it 5 LIs that have the contact item, say 5. Okay, it's pretty awesome, right? So what do? You type basically, I think you need the arrow to say contained within. So you say I have a UL contained within LI with dot. Why is it a dot? It's a class. That's how you indicate a class in CSS. So it's dot here. If I had an ID, I'd have a hash, but I don't. It's a dot. And then you have the number of. Whoops. Go to the end, hit tab. So that's pretty awesome. So Web Essentials does that. Web Essentials will do things like this, like let you go over here to your images folder. We don't have any. But if we did, we could right click and we could say Web Essentials. It's super hard to see, but it says optimize images. And it will reevaluate your image files, your PNGs and your JPEGs and so on, and compress them as much as possible in a lossless way. So literally you cannot see the difference. Our main website that I work at to develop mentor, so develop.com, built an MVC. We've got a bunch of pictures. Here's some pictures of instructors. Right, here's some pictures of Hadoop and Mongo and Node and so on. And all of these pictures, I think if I look at all the pictures across my site, they're 2 megabytes. I went to that pictures folder with Web Essentials and I said compress these in a lossless way as best you can, and it went down 0.5 megabyte. That's pretty big for every single, I mean, not every request hits every picture, but if you go to like, you know, the instructor page or something like that, you hit many of them. Right? There's a lot of them in there. And that just got, you know, like half a meg small. Right? So that's all sort of Web Essentials. There's a bunch of other things. If you do stuff with GitHub, GitHub's pretty awesome, by the way. You guys aren't doing anything with it. Let me find something I can share. So here's, right? These all have these .readme files. These README files are written in a format called Markdown. So you guys are probably familiar with Markdown. So you say like, there's, try to zoom for you here. This is like a HR, this actually indicates that this is H1. And you have some things in here to like understand the URLs. You can do like special URL stuff. Oops. You can do like star A, star B, star C, and that's like a bulleted list and so on. So there's this syntax for Markdown that's used not just at GitHub, but all over the place, right? It's the syntax for the editor at Stack Overflow and so on. So if you have a Markdown file, let me actually just do this. So if I go over here and I click on this and I say, give me the raw, and I save it to my desktop, and I don't call it that, it's called MD. Go down here, almost what I wanted. I do it out of the way. So here's my MD, and I drop this into Visual Studio. Because I have Web Essentials installed, I get a little preview over here, right? So if I did this trick like $A, $B, not star, right? I hit save, there's your bulleted list. So you kind of get this clutter. So there's like, you know, probably 15 to 20 little awesome tricks like this that are in Web Essentials. But the coolest thing that's in Web Essentials, I think, has to do with sort of designing your page and understanding what's happening. So let me go to my home page and let me just make it slightly more complicated. So index. Go over here. Let's suppose we have like a partial view. Actually, I don't really need it. Let's just run it. Now, this requires Visual Studio 2013, because Visual Studio 2013 has this feature called browser link, which basically establishes a link between Visual Studio and your browser via JavaScript, and they kind of stay in sync with each other. If you use Web Essentials, then it sort of channels over that browser link to do all sorts of cool stuff. I'll show you two things. So if I just run this is not even in the debugger. Control F5, like there's not even I'm in the debugger. I see there's no debugging happening here. But let me make this slightly smaller so it's manageable. Notice at the bottom, if you look close, there's this little thing that if you touch it, turns solid. Design, inspect, design is crazy. Inspect, save F12 changes, auto sync F12 changes, and auto. That's just about showing or hiding this little cover thing. Okay, so let's try inspect. You ready? I gotta zoom out for this to be awesome. Work. Are you ready? Watch Visual Studio. I'm over in the layout file. I'm at the top of the layout file. Now I'm in the index.html, highlighting the button. Now I'm down to this part of the index.html. Is that killer or what? So we can do better though. If I double click it, now if I go to design and I go, you want this ASP.NET? It's getting started. This is crappy. For awesome devs. See Visual Studio? See that? For awesome devs. That is super cool, right? So this is technically not an MVC feature, but this is really awesome. I'll show you one more thing and we'll move on. But it supports some of the things we're going to do later, like less and Sass. So yeah.
So it's not an MVC feature, so we just work with, say, revenues.
I'm pretty sure it would work with, yeah, I'm pretty sure. And it'll work with like Opera, all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's, you know, it's not, you saw me do it in Chrome, right? I know it works in IE in Chrome. It's not even an IE thing. Yeah. Yeah, there's just, if you view source, you'll see there's like some extra JavaScript in the bottom. Right? And also with the F12 tools, like if I go down here and hit F12, and then I go and I change this, I can say sync those changes back over Visual Studio. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So that's definitely a recommendation, is install Web Essentials. Right? You're going to see that we're going to talk about less in a minute. That's required pretty much as well. And Web Essentials is the way you get less support in a good way. It also has special support for TypeScript, markdowns, encoding, and a whole bunch of other things that, I don't know. The one other thing that's pretty awesome is a lot of times you guys will make a change to a CSS file, and then you switch over to how, then you refresh, and you gotta scroll back down to where you were. Maybe it didn't refresh, you like Control F5, you're like, darn, no, I gotta clear the cache F5, right? And you try to get it to come back, and eventually it'll show you. Watch this. This is what it's interesting, I'm pretty sure. So let's go over to our CSS. Should be in the content site. And let's just do something super dramatic. Let me make sure it's running. Okay, it's running. Watch this. Background, yellow. That's right. Watch. Switch. Oh wait, I gotta save. Switch. Boom, yellow. I didn't refresh, nothing. I just switched, you know what, yellow is not cool. Let's try a green. Save, switch, green. Like, it automatically realizes you go to Visual Studio or somewhere else back to your web browser and that CSS file changed, so we better just refresh that. Didn't reload the data, nothing. Like, that's really super excellent. Okay, let's install it and let it. Okay, number 9. So you should minify your CSS and your JavaScript because one of the slowest things about loading up your site is actually the establishing of the HTTP rules for each little part of your JavaScript and CSS and so on. Not necessarily the speed at which it downloads, because a lot of times it's like 12K or something. It just comes down instantly, basically. But the reestablishment of a connection back to your machine, the current browsers, basically, I believe they limit the number of concurrent requests to a given server to 6. So maybe you're downloading an image, you're trying to give it JavaScript, but there's a whole bunch of little ones, and so on. It's a big problem. So you should try to group this into as few requests as you possibly can. So maybe you bundle your jQuery validation, and so on. All right, so this is cool. It's built into MVC 4 and above. Too bad it doesn't really work. So what do I mean by it doesn't work? So let's see what it does, and I'll tell you why that is broken. Okay, so here's some script files we're including. And we're going to have this code up here. First, we define it like this. So we went in our bundle config, you see this code that says, go and find all the jQuery versions and include them and sort of find the latest. That's cool. Same thing, find a couple of like jQuery.validate.js, jQuery.validate.unobtrusive.js, and so on, and include them. And then you say render this bundle. And what you get, actually, is for the debug version, it looks just as if you'd included each file individually. For the release version, it's like, you know what? We want to make sure we can cache our JavaScript and CSS because that will dramatically increase the feel of the speed of our site, right? So we're going to put mad caching on our server so that like this stuff is good for a year or something, right? But because of that, we want to make sure every new request, if you ever change those files, they need to immediately change. So they make sort of a hash, not quite a hash, but something like it, of the file as part of the URL, so it's always different in the browser. If it sees a new URL on the end, it's like, we got to get this from scratch. Right? This is cool, this works fine. But this is totally broken. So let me see if I can convince you guys that my browser will have to cooperate. Okay, so let's go here and let's write cool JavaScript. Remember I said this is what you should do if you have your own JavaScript. So create a new folder, call it JS. Don't put it in there. That part is off limits. All right, so we're going to create something, I'll just call it, I'm going to create a new JavaScript file. There we go, JavaScript file. I'll call this blogger is what I'm calling it. So let's call it blogger.core.js. Okay, and so let's go down here and do this. Dollar document, ready. Doesn't matter. Okay. And let's just say alert. Let's just do nothing. Okay. Just leave it blank. Let me include this, my layout here, with my shared, this thing, and remember it goes down here, so we'll put it there. Let's run it once. Okay, there it is, it's still running, it's pretty awesome. Okay, so let's go over here to my JS file. Let's just say $body. Fade in. Is that right? Fade, okay. Good. Save it. Come over here and click again. try. Let's get the source. Let's go down here in the bottom where my JavaScript is. Walker.core. Oh, maybe I did write it wrong. Or maybe that actually made it refresh. Let's find out. Needs to speed fast. Yeah. So what happens a lot of times is you'll change this JavaScript file and it will get cached by the browser. And you go refresh it and then you're like, why is this not working? Oh, you know, you have to like go and like Control F5 it or somehow find the thing and fix it. So we don't do that at development, or on our website we do something different. So let me just pull up develop.com just because I want to make sure there's time for other things. Here, develop.com. Okay, so we've got more stuff over here, you'll see. Right. So in the shared views, we've got this include JavaScript thing. And what we do is for every JavaScript file, we basically, I'm going to wrap this, you can't actually do this, but we say append to the end of this sort of hash of the file. We wrote a real simple class, which I'll show you, it's in the slide, that is sort of optimized for production, but not optimized. It constantly checks every page request, it will regenerate that and debug, so you never get out of sync. Use it for CSS and JavaScript. And so, you know, since we added this little feature, where we said, just add on some not random cache ID, but a cache ID which is the MD5 hash of that file. We never once had to F5 our page, Control F5, or clear a cache, or anything for CSS, for JavaScript. Now, what does the Microsoft version solve? It completely solves that same problem in production. But in development, it's still a super pain in the butt, right? You still are having these out of sync JavaScript files and CSS files and all sorts of stuff. So, what I recommend is you do something sort of for yourself, at least in debug. Okay? In production, you can use what they use if you want, it's fine. Well, you'll see that production, at least for CSS, less would be a much better choice than taking regular CSS and bundling. Right? We'll talk about that in a second. Right? And then if you do this, you can set super aggressive caching. So over here at develop.com, if you go to like our JavaScript, maybe not. It might be our other website. Yeah. Okay, so here's our JavaScript. You can see there's a web config. People are like, why is there a web config in your JavaScript? That doesn't make any sense. So what does a web config do? It says, cache the heck out of this file, right? This one is only for a day, but for our CSS images, it's like a month, right? But it's totally safe to do that because, you know, that sort of cache ID thing, it'll change, and the URL that they actually see to get the JavaScript is completely different. So there's no cache stay on this product. Okay. So if you want to do this, I included the little thing to do the link file hash, which you can see an example how to use it here, and then the little hashing MD5 hashing. So you just copy those two things into a folder, and you're good to go. Oh yeah, and what you need to put in for your cache. Okay. All right. So number 10, use a reset CSS file. Okay. So programming for the web is awesome until somebody calls you up and goes, oh, this page doesn't look right in my browser. Well, what are you using? I'm using Firefox 3.5 on Linux. Oh, I'm sorry it doesn't look awesome for you, but I don't really know what to tell you. Like, I'm just not going to worry about that, right? Or I don't know how many people send me messages about this page just doesn't look right in 96. Yeah, it's not going to. Sorry. But you can go a ways towards solving that problem automatically. The differences are typically when a browser sees something that has no style, it has to still apply some style. So each browser makes up a style. They're like, oh, an H1 looks like this, and it has this font size if you don't say what it is, right? So what you can do is you can include this thing called a reset CSS, which will apply a style to everything so that the browsers don't guess. You know, everything has a style and it's consistent across browsers. There's still implementation details like I don't understand footer or something like that. but at least in terms of the stuff they do know, they should have a consistent style, all right? So there's a bunch you can choose. Probably the best one is normalized CSS. The original is Eric Meyer's reset CSS, but it was not really meant to be used as something to build from, more like to inspire other people to do that in a richer way. Okay? So you guys can do this. You can go grab that and put it in your project. And it's good, but better than that is to choose a really high-end CSS web front-end framework. So something like Bootstrap. But Bootstrap is not the only one. In fact, there's a bunch of awesome things out there that you guys can do to go grab. So let me just click on this, see what happens. Apparently it opens. Okay, cool. So this is a GitHub page that sort of categorizes the different web front ends, what you can do with them, and so on. So let me try to zoom in. Maybe that will work. So here's Bootstrap. It says it works on i8 and above, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Firefox, Opera. It has support for less and SaaS and mobile with the MIT license. You could also choose other things, like you could choose Foundation or UI Kit. UI Kit's pretty awesome, actually. Do they have a link to it? UI Kit. So UI Kit is actually built upon Bootstrap. I don't know if they have any examples, but they're pretty excellent as well. So there's a bunch of choices, not just Bootstrap. But chances are you would use Bootstrap because MVC 5 comes with Bootstrap. So you kind of like got to rip Bootstrap out anyway, and that's going to mess up a lot of things. So I would just say use Bootstrap. There's a lot of really excellent stuff you can do, like, just for expediency, I'll pull up our website. So like these cool buttons here, the responsive design. So like, if you make it, see how the course is, and there's like this bigger drop-down menu. If I make it bigger, these things, there's a few more things to go up there, and the more you zoom out, the more menu items come across here. Little labels and these cool shiny text boxes and round pictures, all of that stuff comes from Bootstrap. But the other thing that's not so obvious that's important that comes from Bootstrap is sort of the topography and the other things that are less obvious, more designery, like the fact that if you go here, like the spacing between the lines and the spacing between the letters and stuff. It's never right. You say file and project without something set in these things. It's always hard if you're not a designer to get it just right. So I definitely recommend using Bootstrap. And Bootstrap comes with its own variation of a reset CSS file, right? So it also fixes that problem in its own way. So you can use the sort of the foundational ones, but I would just say use Bootstrap or something like it. Okay. Excellent. Okay, number 11. Learn less. How many of you guys know less? Yeah, okay. Let's see. I'm using Bootstrap. No, actually, that was more than. How many of you are actually using any of your sites today? Yeah, cool. So let me show you why I would encourage you to use this. I still have development. That's the wrong one. So here's another project that we have. This project has a massive CSS file, like nobody's business. So if you go to the learning line, that's our online training stuff. If you look at the CSS for that, it's got like 8,000 lines of custom CSS mixed with some other like Bootstrap overrides. So instead of trying to manage that, which we did try for a long time, as like a enormous CSS file, CSS has a way to include a bunch of CSS, like nested ones, but all those are separate browser requests, right? There's a bunch of slows your site load down, so you kind of like got to decide what you want to get. So what we did is we ended up moving our stuff to less, and with less, you actually I don't want that one, I want this one. Let's move all the stuff away. You didn't see that. With less, you can say basically the same import statement. You can break up your CSS into little tiny pieces. Like here's the stuff that only has to do with tags. Like how tags load and show up and float and all that sort of stuff on our site. If you were doing real CSS, you wouldn't break it apart like that because it would make your site slow. Right? But if you're doing less actually takes these things and processes them like a programming language. So you can actually see it does them, brings them all in all at once. Okay, so let's look at one of these over here. Figuring this out, there's all the pieces. So I said tags, I don't even know what's in the middle. So there's some stuff on tags. you see it has the things to do with tags, but notice that things look a little bit funny. Like this is totally normal CSS until here, right? And you've got it nested piece, right? Well, what do you guys, if you don't look to the right, what do you think that would mean, nested within the other? Those of you who don't know, just guess. Yeah, it implies titles within tags, right? Or the count that is contained within a tag, but not stuff without. So in normal CSS, you would say tag.title, tag.count, and with spaces, right? But look at this. See, CSS is being generated, is that right there. Right? So it lets you write in a cool little program, and you get to actually have functions and math, like this is 80%, and the width of this thing is 100% minus whatever the width of that thing is. So you don't end up with something that's trying to be 111% wide, you know, because somebody forgot to update the padding of the sidebar or something stupid like that. All right, so you can do all sorts of really cool stuff. And if you have Web Essentials installed, like I said, how often that would be, I can come over here and I can actually expand this out, and I can see, zoom for you, that there's a tag CSS and a tag min, a minified version. And you can, I actually have this one that's everything put together, which has the all CSS and the all minified. So if I open this up, this is like probably gonna take a while. You see it's just one line, but it's one huge line. We basically throw a bootstrap and our CSS in it. Right, and that's just one request to the server. Right, so instead of using MVC's somewhat cool, like minification and bundling for CSS, just use less. You already get minification and bundling, but you get less, which is awesome. Right, so super easy to learn. Check out lesscss.org. You get nesting, variables, methods you can call, you can write something called mixins, minification, all this sort of stuff without the drawbacks, like breaking your files into too many small pieces from a performance perspective. All right, number 12. Do something to add real jQuery IntelliSense. For some reason, Microsoft had super awesome jQuery IntelliSense, and they decided, nah, that's for Windows, we're taking it out. The real guys know these signatures, what these mean. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You might be like, Michael, I know, like just, oh, well, let me go to our project. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so if I go over here, you might be thinking, okay, we've got all this stuff. Like in our scripts folder, there's this reference, and oh look, the reference has jQuery. We created our little thing here. It's got our legacy jQuery. This is all sort of automatically added in by Web Essentials. All right, so I should be an IntelliSense for this. That's cool. I can say dollar. I can find it. $.post. Control space. What do I get? What is that? Well, okay, something goes in there. There's like a JS and a dot. There's like a stuff. It must be URL, okay? And then no, I meant little URL. Right, we'll figure that out in a minute. What are those? Like, is it function? Is it? Like, what goes in here, right? I mean, actually, no, but it doesn't help you know that, right? So watch this. If I go over here and I go click, let's go download Microsoft's, which they don't give to you for reasons that are unknown. Download Microsoft's VS Doc file. And let's just say save. This on the desktop. Grab it off the desktop. Let's go back here. Paste it. You got to include it in your project. So we'll go over here and say show all files. Find it and say include in project and show all files. That might be enough. Let's see, $.post. I think, yeah, better? Let's see, oh yeah, that's right. It's the URL, then the data, then the callback, then the type. That's what I want to see. Okay. That's not hard, but it's not obvious. That's what's required to get it working. So you'll save yourself a lot of pain and stuff. have a VS stock file. Absolutely. Okay. So the JS stock file is built by Microsoft. There may be other ones like some other people put together, but if you look at it, it's like a special syntax to describe it. It's like a bunch of comments where it talks about here's the thing, and actually, right? So if it doesn't have this, then it doesn't really work. Yeah. You'll still get code completion and like show you the method and stuff, but not actually documents. But if it has a VS doc file, then yes, it will. Okay. Let's see, let's keep going. Number 13, lucky 13. What is that? All right, so this is always been a pet peeve of mine. What are we talking about? We're talking about ASP.NET MVC, the very first letter in the acronym. M stands for models, right? When I look at the project template and I see that folder, I have no idea what goes in there. Anything that I can think of that goes in there is wrong. Always the wrong choice to put something in that folder, almost always. Because if you look at like the stuff that comes out of Microsoft, they're like, oh, you can put like an entity framework data model in there. And like probably your web services and everything else you do for your entire, 500,000 line web project probably goes in that folder for the most part. And you're like, no it doesn't. Those are like separate libraries and abstractions and things like a unit test and so on, right? So it doesn't go in there. Well, if those don't go in there, what does go in there? Probably nothing, right? So when I create a new project, a lot of times I just delete that folder or rename it because nothing should go in that folder. What it should probably go into is a thing called view models. So sometimes having models that map exactly to your UI so that your Razor code is not doing lots of logic makes good sense. But those are not the same things that are your core data model, right? Those go in like down here at the bottom, those green boxes, there's other DLLs, right? So to make it super clear, I would make this view models folder, and in case you guys are unsure what I'm talking about, let me just show you an example here, really quick. So let's collapse all that stuff over here and say, well, what are you talking about? So I'm gonna create a folder, like I said, view models. And in here, let's just say we're gonna have a, let's say, home view model. All right, so just because I don't have time, I'm just gonna have some silly stuff here. This is gonna be a string array called post. Really, these would be objects, right? Now, if I wanted to show something on my blog, probably I'd want to like limit the stuff shown on the home page to like the 10 newest or something like that, but maybe add paging. Right? So if I go over to my home controller, which is here, and if I just return, like let's imagine I had a class called post, and I return like a post array as my method. Well, how do I convey the paging information? Right? How do I tell it this is actually page 3 of 7? So that there's the next button, the previous button, the URLs are there. Like if it's the first page, you don't want to always show the previous button because there's nowhere to go. That would be ridiculous. Right? So you need something that takes two pieces of information, the paging and the post, and puts them together. All right? The other time you need view models often is when you're doing form post back, and you need to add data annotations for validation, required, minimum values 10, things like that. Those probably won't belong in your entity framework data model because then you now depend on UI stuff that is in the totally wrong place. So you build a view model with that validation and then it delegates somehow to your copy to delegates, whatever, to your data model. All right, so we probably over here have the post and probably an integer for the page. Let's call it maybe for the obvious current page. Maybe another one called total pages. Make sense? All right, so these things, I know these go in my web project because they're about my UI. They're so tied to my UI, so my Razor code doesn't become a complete nasty mess. So that kind of stuff totally belongs in here. What goes in here, I know, because it belongs in some other project if you think it's a model. All right, so you can test it, so you can reuse it, whatever. Make sense? All right. Okay, so definitely super easy, but you gotta get everyone on your team to agree on it. All right, number 14. So you can create these partial views that help you normalize or standardize how you include CSS and JavaScript. on a really simple project, you might say, well, we include jQuery, and we include Bootstrap, and we include our JavaScript. But as these things grow, you might have 20 JavaScript files, and the order in which they're included really matters. You might have multiple layout pages. And if you forget to update one, but you update the other, you're going to be like, why is this part of the site broken? Just don't get it. All right, so just make a JavaScript partial view that always does the same thing, and just include that. Right? So instead of putting it in your layout, just do this HTML partial and put your stuff here. Same thing for CSS. Right? Super easy to do. You will thank yourself for it 6 months in when you have a lot of stuff, and you still haven't had a problem including JavaScript in the wrong word. All right, number 15. Use web deploy. You guys use web deploy to get your stuff out online? Awesome. So if you haven't used this before, web deploy basically lets you push a button. It will go talk to your server over a secondary port, 8172 by default, using SSL. Even if your server doesn't have a certificate, use like a self-generated certificate for it. And it'll say, these are the hashes, or actually, that's what it should say. It says, these are the last times these files are modified. What do you have? And maybe you've got a 10 megabyte site, but only this picture and this CSS file has changed. So you go, well, these are the two you need to upload. Push a button to push them to your server. So our stuff at Developmentor is hosted on EC2 in Virginia. I live in the west coast of the US, in Oregon, and when I want to push a new version out, I right-click on the project they publish, and I touch that button, and then a few seconds later, the new version is running on the server in Virginia, and I don't ever go to there through a remote desktop or anything. So that's all really good. There's a few caveats. If you've got a really big site and it's popular and there's people on it, it's sort of in this incomplete, messed up state while you're uploading potentially, because maybe you're uploading a DLL and you've deleted another one, and it's just, it doesn't upload in one shot. It just pushes it onto the server, and as requests come in, if they hit it in the middle of that, things are all sorts of busted. So I'm working on this open source project that we use at Developmentor. We use it now. I'm working on making the open source version of it better. But if you go to GitHub, and you go to Smarter Web Deploy, like I said, it needs some documentation, so don't do anything with it yet, but watch that space. Basically, what we do at Developmentor is we actually have a secondary website that nobody sees. You can't really go to it. But we publish to that. So all the little slow uploads going to the server actually end up dropping into there. And when it's totally done, it does a on the file system hash to compare the files and then changes it, like just does a copy local. And while it's doing that, it takes the site offline, shows a nice page, say we're upgrading, we'll be back in 3 seconds. Don't worry, I'll refresh this for you, right? So it's super easy. If I had more time, I'd actually push out a version to our live server and see what happens. But just for the sake of time, let's keep going. Okay, so to get to that, it's just github.com/MikeCKennedy, and then you'll be able to find it. Okay, but I definitely recommend this. Not very many people raise their hands. And, if you're doing like FTP or you're manually copying stuff over a network drive, there's a better way. This is definitely better. Okay, much more reliable. This also does the web config transforms automatically. So here you can see we're publishing to Amazon Web Services staging. We have a separate web config transform that changes like the connection string, e-commerce behaviors, things like that for the staging server than it does for production. And just by pushing this button, it automatically selects that, which deployed through FTP doesn't. You know what I'm talking about? So let me just show you if you're not sure. If you go to the web config, there's like these little deploy, debug and release versions that do transformations. You can have as many of these as you want, one for each of the open type. So not only does it sort of save you some copy, it also makes that completely reliable. All right, where are we? Number 60. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Does the target server have to be configured in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do you have to configure the target server? You have to install the web deploy on the server side and enable it and open that firewall for it. Yeah, so this is yeah, well, I mean, I know there's certain situations where it can be used, but still, it's super handy. Okay, number 16. CSS3 is awesome. CSS itself is awesome. CSS3 is extra awesome. So you guys should use it. But you know, when you start looking at it, you see things like this. You'll see like dash webkit dash box.shadow, dash ms dash box.shadow, dash and just box.shadow. Why can't I just say box shadow? Why don't I say these other like incompatible freaky things? Well, because somebody's using IE8, that's why. But still, I shouldn't have to say that. There should be some magical thing that just takes it away. Like Web Essentials will take this and let you kick off these other like vendor-specific prefix versions for you, which is kind of handy, but it's actually the wrong way, because then your CSS becomes less maintainable, not less in a less programming language, just less in a less good way. Okay, so you can get this thing called prefix free. And I love their little slogan, break free from CSS prefix hell. So what you do is, it's kind of like Modernizer. You include this JavaScript file at the top of your page, and then you write CSS like this. And everybody goes, oh, the browser doesn't know box shadow, but it knows ms-box shadow. Bam, it just puts that in there for you. Okay, so you have nice, maintainable, forward-looking, not backward-looking CSS. Right? But it doesn't, you don't pay the price of like, I'm sorry, it doesn't work in 99, you gotta have 99, something like that. Right? So it's super easy, just get it here. The URL is kind of messy on GitHub, but it's on the slides, which are in your USB. Okay, number 17, we have two more things, and then we'll be done. We're just about out of time. So one is use JavaScript namespaces, or some other way of organizing your JavaScript. But here's a super simple one that I think I can convince most of you guys to do, because it's just like .NET namespaces. So you can break your functionality into areas, like we could define a site.core section of functionality, a site.animations functionality, and a site functionality. You put functions and objects and all sorts of things in there, and you get really cool intelligence. So you can say site.core animation, logging, whatever. You say animation dot, and it pulls up the next thing. All the stuff is in your animation. All right, so how do you do that? Well, namespaces in JavaScript are just functions, right? You have functions containing, or sorry, functions, objects, which really are like functions anyway, but here you have objects, and then you just add properties dynamically to them to define the namespace. So here we have a site, which probably is defined somewhere else. So we use this little funky syntax, site or new object. It's like a new empty object, just in case, but probably it's already defined. And then we add the animations to it. And if somebody's included this file twice, well, let's just reuse the same thing. But if not, let's make a new one. And then you can say site.core, site.animations, all sorts of stuff. It's a really nice way to organize your code. There's lots of JavaScript patterns and stuff. But this one is like, you know, if you like namespaces in C#, you should like them in JavaScript. It's super easy, right? Okay, now if you follow a simple convention of one namespace per JavaScript file, then you can solve another problem. And let me see if I can show you the problem, and then I'll show you the fix. So let's see. JavaScript. Will that do it? Sweet. Okay, so I wrote this little library, but more importantly, it has an example that you can run. What if I have some code, this time it happens to be running at JSFiddle.net. What if I have something that hosts an event handler? Like I've got some jQuery code right here. Let's see if I can do something like this. Super easy. Clicks on this name it button, and it finds the input of type text, grabs the value of it, and it appends it to the document. Hey there, whatever your name is. That seems harmless, right? Well, what if you include it 3 times? Well, it runs 3 times. That's kind of a problem, right? And you might think, oh, well, we're never going to just include the JavaScript file 3 times. That would be stupid. I get, of course. But it's not that obvious. So over here, maybe somebody's gone here and in the web config, the layout, which is here, they put at the bottom, include JavaScript, whatever. But maybe you've written some files a while ago, like a view, where you said, oh, I have to do this certain JavaScript, so I'm going to inject it into the script section. Maybe it's include the JavaScript file, not actually script. Well, now somebody goes, oh, we need this more broadly, so they've actually put it in the layout. Well, now it's included twice. So, how do you fix that? Well, with a super simple function, this, and sort of a convention to use one namespace per file, you can totally solve it. So you can, whenever you want to run some code, you can always ask first, hey, is this file not already been loaded up here, right? If it's not, the first load of this namespace, and the name just so we can write it out, well then it's just bail. Right? And then otherwise, you just go write all your code. And you can include this file like 20 times and it won't hurt it, other than slowing down your site a little bit maybe. Right? So here's the code you include as you're sort of checking whether or not it's first loaded. So if I go back over here, and I kind of cruise around for a while, if you go down, there's another version on JS Fiddle here, where we don't change the stuff we're including. We're doing it all the same, but we just have this function where we ask, has it already been included? If it has, then don't hook the events, just don't do anything, just go away. Make sense? Save you some debugging pain as well. All right, so those last two are kind of tied together. It only works if you use namespaces or come up with some other method. Pretty straightforward. All right, so that's what I have for you. There's probably other things I could put in there, but you know, there's quite a bit that we talked about. We saw that even though the MVC project and the web project seem like they're pretty well built, there's a lot of stuff you can do to make it better. All right, some of that's tooling like runtime controls and prefix free. Some of that's techniques like caching. Some of it's languages, some of it's infrastructure. But hopefully you guys have a bunch of little things to take away and apply to your project and be happy. All right, thanks for coming, everyone.